So just to recap and maybe to give a small introduction yet to chapter 9, again on page 220. So chapter 8 really delved into the other side of what is considered as good, or the realm of holiness. And as he called it, it is the side of Sitra Achra, which really means the other side, but also the side of Shalosh Klipot Atmeot, where the 3 impure peels dwell. And basically that is the side that is so negative that it can't even be transformed or channeled towards positivity, right? Now, we've been dealing with the side that is both neutral. You know, most of life can be elevated towards holiness, whether, as we've mentioned so many times, whether it's through eating and then saying the blessing of the eating and then using the energy of the food that the eating gives us to do good, or whether it's sleeping with the same intentions and so on and so forth. But there is a side of that world. There is, again, a part of that world that he delved into in chapter 8 that cannot be redeemed. Maybe we'll be able to redeem it when Mashiach comes, but until then it cannot be redeemed. Anyway, the idea now, as we transition to chapter 9, which I think is also in a way a very important shift that the Tanya makes, and that is that now that the Tanya has explained the realm of holiness, now that the Tanya has explained the realm of the klipot, whether it's the neutral zone or the impurity of the world that cannot be elevated, now that he's explained those 2 big ideas, he can then speak about the tension between those 2 ideas. And that's really what chapter 9 begins to do. How do we find ourselves, and how do we engage in this constant battle between the good and the bad? Not just out there, by the way, but most importantly in here, right? How do we really relate to this battle between the divine soul and the animal soul that is naturally more inclined to the world of the klipot, and the divine soul that is more inclined to the world of holiness? How do we manage this constant battle? And at the same time, how do we ensure that the divine soul prevails? And really, that's the overarching theme now in the next few chapters, but beginning with chapter 9. So that's where we're going to. Let's, without any further ado, let's continue. Middle of page 220. Does anyone want to read? Anyone? The previous chapters describe the 2 souls of man.
Okay, the previous chapters describe the 2 souls of man.
Yes.
The godly soul and its attributes and holy garments, and the animal soul, its attributes and the garments of Kelipa, through which it finds expression. They also described the respective domains of Kelipa and holiness, establishing the points of reference for this pivotal chapter, which discusses the relationship between the 2 souls and the struggle between them.
Right. So that's what we said. Okay, very good. Very good. Let's continue. Now with the words of the Tanya, the abode.
The abode of the animal soul derived from the Kelipat Noga in every Jew is in the heart, in the left ventricle that is filled with blood, as it is written, for the blood is the soul.
Right. It's interesting, and we'll talk about this, but I want to get to the commentary of Rabbi Steinsaltz. So, as we said, we're about to speak about the struggle now between those 2 sides that we fully understood each separately, but now combining the 2 and speaking about the struggle between the 2. The Tanya, or Rabbi Shneur Zalman V'Liadi, the author of the Tanya, begins with the question of where. Let's first define where these souls are. We're going to speak about the struggle, but let's define where they are. I think it's indicative of a general approach that one should have towards any challenge in life, any type of battle in life. The first question one has to ask is where? And what does that mean? Where is this challenge? Because the inclination that we have, that's part of human nature, is to see these challenges as too overwhelming. Gosh, it's taking over my life. And the Tanya, in a very subtle way, tells us, no, there's a proportion to that challenge. Don't let it overtake your life. Define its place. Where is it? And you'll see it's not that big. It takes a very particular place, and you shouldn't allow it to overflow to to other areas of your life, because that's what challenges tend to do, and that's how we tend to deal with them. Because again, of human nature, we get too emotional sometimes. So the first question, again, the Tanya, it's not even a question, but in a very subtle way, I think it's so beautiful to say, okay, we're about to speak about the struggle between the divine soul and the animal soul, but let's first ask the question to put it in proportion. Where is this? Once we've defined its boundaries, then we can surgically attack it. But don't allow it to like completely overwhelm you that you feel that you're hopeless. So that's just the subtle way of the Tanya that teaches us how to first deal with challenges. What's step number one? But let's continue now with the commentary. So where is this animal soul that is a threat to our divine soul? The animal soul, as he says, is in the heart. And the heart is full of blood. As we all know, the heart is what pumps blood to the rest of the body. That's where the animal soul dwells. But the commentary, let's go to the commentary of Rabbi Steinsaltz. This follows.
This follows the ancient anatomical conception of the heart as consisting of two chambers with different functions, one ventricle receiving air, oxygen, and the other being full of blood. In any case, the Tanya is not a book on anatomy, and the author is not suggesting that negative traits can be removed by a surgical operation. The issue at hand is not where the animal soul resides in the anatomical sense speaking, but the relation between the two souls and the major role that the animal soul plays in the inner life of a man. In this sense, the animal soul resides in the heart, particularly in the part of the heart that relates to the blood and therefore the body. For the animal soul is deeply connected with the heart and the emotions. It is true that, as chapter 6 discussed, the animal soul does not consist only of desires and feelings, but is a complete entity containing also intellectual and abstract components. Yet the center of gravity of the animal soul is with the emotions in the heart.
Right. Let's just stop there for a second. So he defines the dwelling place of the animal soul and the boundaries of it in the heart. It's interesting now, again, it's not a book of anatomy, as Rabbi Steinsaltz says, but it's interesting to note that the animal soul is directly linked, therefore, to the emotional side of us, to the heart, which is also the emotional, at least metaphorically, is the emotional side of us. While, as you'll soon see, the divine soul is linked to the intellectual side of us. Now, why is that? Because in order for us to truly win this battle between the divine soul and the animal soul, we have to recognize that the intellect needs to be in the driver's seat, right? That the emotional side of us is an important side. We're not saying that we should eradicate our emotions, but what we are saying is that it's the intellect that should direct the emotions and not, God forbid, the other way around. The Talmud has a very powerful line that says that Reshaim libam birshutam, that the wicked, they are almost in possession of their hearts. It's the hearts that control them. Libam birshutam, that's what I mean, in possession of their hearts. It's the heart that completely controls them. And we have to understand that sometimes when we allow the emotions to overtake us, it really comes from the animal soul that dwells where the emotions are. And that's why he first and foremost defines the animal soul's place as the place of the heart, to recognize that sometimes if we are indeed way too overly emotional, or we're not thinking straight, as the expression goes, it's simply because the animal soul has taken care of us, has controlled us, and what we have to do in order to first and foremost get ourselves out of that state is to allow the intellect to reign again, because that's where the divine soul is. So that's one point. The other point I want to make, and again, I don't want to be the only one talking, so please feel free to disagree and add your own comments and so on and so forth. But the other point I want to make is that the animal soul, again, is directly related to the blood. That's where the blood is pumped to the rest of the body, right? It dwells in the heart, so that's where the blood center is. and the animal soul goes directly to the blood. And this is what Rabbi Stein in a way is very much saying, and that is that the animal soul has, I hate to use that word, but I'll explain what I mean. The animal soul has bloodly desires. Bloodly desires, what I mean is really bodily desires. And therefore it dwells where the heat of the body is, and that's the blood. And another way to figure out if we are winning this battle against the animal soul is to ask ourselves, am I being too bloodly or too bodily, too physical? Not only am I being too emotional, which was point one, but point two is, am I being too materialistic, too bloodly? That's where the animal soul dwells. That's what the animal soul wants. That's what the animal soul will try to sell you. This worldly, the worldly pleasures of this world, or maybe the worldly temptations and distractions of this world, or the worldly noise of this world. If you don't have moments that are soulful, then you'll remain in that bloodly compartment, which is also where the animal soul dwells, and then you'll be overcome by it. So I think right at the onset of chapter 9, the author of the Tanya is already giving us 3 very powerful words of wisdom. Number one is first identify the where. Don't allow the challenges of life to completely overtake you. Number two, have your intellect on the driver's seat, because the animal soul that dwells where the emotions are is going to try and overtake you through your emotions. So have your mind control your heart. And number three, have soulful moments during the day, as many as possible, because the worldly moments are the moments guided by the animal soul, because it dwells there. Animal soul dwells in the world, in the bloodly part of ourselves, in the bodily parts of ourselves. So those are the 3 major ideas that the Tanya already offers here at the onset of chapter 9. But again, I don't want to be the only one talking, so feel free to share your opinion and your mind and your comments, etc.
It reminds me the kashrut that we have to remove the blood from all meat, right? Because blood is impure and we don't want to intake any blood.
That's right.
Right? I mean, I'm just speculating. I'm just
No, you're right. You're right. There is a very interesting relationship that Jews have with blood. That's why, by the way, for centuries, one of the greatest the fabrications of anti-Semites against Jews was the Blood Libel, right? Yeah. Where they said the Jews have to kill non-Jews to use the blood to bake matzah for Passover. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, which is the most far-fetched thing one can come up with, especially against Jews, because we're so careful not to come into contact with blood, not to allow blood to even enter our body, to the point that, by the way, I say this to my children, but it's mentioned in the Code of Jewish Law, that if a mosquito bites you, right? If you have a little mosquito bite and there's blood all over, you can't lick that bite, as some kids would do, just, to try and soothe their bite. Because by licking it, you'll be licking the blood. Even though it's your own blood, still your blood. And we're not allowed to consume any ounce of blood, any inch of blood, nothing, an iota of blood. And then my kids would tell me, but sometimes I have sores inside my mouth. So what am I going to do about that? Well, if it's inside your mouth, there's nothing you can do about that. But to purposely insert them into your body, that we can't do. Now, in a way, I think the Kabbalistic reason, we can go into the halachic reasons too, but the Kabbalistic reasons are based on what the Tanya says here. And that is that we have to ensure that a divine soul wins all the time, not some of the time, no, most of the time, all the time. How do we allow divine soul to win all the time? By always being in complete control of our body, of our blood, so to speak. Not to allow the blood to take control even for a split second, even with 1 little inch. Our soul always needs to be in control, and our intellect guides that soul. So that's the major idea. But you're right. It reminds us of all these prohibitions against blood. And also when we eat kosher, like you were saying, we have to salt the meat twice to suck the blood out of any type of kosher meat that we eat. Without it, the meat is not kosher. It could come from a cow, it could come from a chicken, kosher animals, but it's not kosher if you didn't salt the meat. because the salting of the meat extracts every drop of blood. And by the way, there are, I can tell you, at least, 100 different laws that pertain to the salting of the meat. As a rabbi, you have to go and study those laws, and it's part of your rabbinic test at the end to see if you know everything about the salting of the meat, which was a prominent theme up until 70, 80 years ago. Today, no one salts the meat at home, but just again, that's how careful we are with blood. But again, going back to the divine, more Kabbalistic reason, it's because we have to be really careful that the animal soul is always controlled by the divine soul, and not even once can it rear its head. And the rearing of its head is really what we're afraid of, and therefore no consumption of blood whatsoever. Good point.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes, Haiti, please.
I know that you're talking metaphorically, but still, literally, what happens in a blood transfusion or a heart transplant, or if they put a pig valve in your heart, or all that stuff? How is that handled halachically?
That's a great question. So all that which we said excludes any situation of life and death, and certainly other medical situations, because life is of primary importance in Judaism. B'charta b'chaim, we should choose life. It says that v'chai b'hem, we should live in order to fulfill the commandments. And therefore, if one needs to consume blood through the mouth or through injections or in other ways in order to heal, in order to v'chai b'hem, again, in order to live fully a healthy life, then of course that is allowed, because life takes precedence over those prohibitions that we mentioned before. As it is, by the way, with other commandments, it takes precedence over Shabbat, takes precedence over Yom Kippur that's coming up. Life is always the number one value in Judaism. So it certainly takes precedence over the consumption of blood in one way or another. Yeah.
Well, sometimes I've heard that people who get heart transplants sometimes have a sense of a different personality almost.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that with other types of transplants, kidney transplants, liver transplants, even. People feel like they have a whole new dimension to themselves. Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, who am I to comment on that? I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's research. It would be interesting to read that. But there's certainly an impact that blood can have on people. Maybe that's another reason why we're so careful not to consume blood, because you have to be you. On the other hand, again, if life is what we're focusing on, then be be someone else too. Life comes first. If really that's the influence, of course. I don't know. Again, I don't know if there's research on that, but yeah.
Rabbi, I'm being silly on this, but when you started saying it, the first thing I thought of was, I'm glad I go to Michael Steinberg, because when I have a bleeding of this, and I'm thinking as you're talking about it, does it help to go to a Jewish doctor who is at least praying for you in a better way?
Oh, yeah, that's right. And who's cognizant.
Really, I wasn't going to speak, but I couldn't resist.
No, it's a good point. It's a very good point. Yeah, it goes back to the comment of my children. You're right. I want to add another Kabbalistic aspect to that, and that is that it's not like we're ignoring blood. It's not like blood is our enemy. Blood is our life force. Right? But again, the idea is that we have to be in control of blood, right? That's the whole idea here. Now, Kabbalah also teaches that it's interesting because the word for human being in Hebrew is Adam. Adam is really, if you think about this, a combination of two Hebrew words, right? I mean, in a way, two Hebrew words. Adam is spelled Aleph, Dalet, Mem. So if you split the word into two, you have Aleph on one side and Dalet Mem on the other side, which spells out the word Dam, which means blood. So it's almost the acknowledgement that the human being is indeed one big piece of blood. Dam. There's a lot of blood in Adam. But on the other hand, let's not forget the first part of the word, and that's Aleph. Aleph usually stands for God. Aleph has a numerical value of 1. It's only one God. It's the only entity that exists. Oneness is everywhere. That's what Aleph stands for, God. Now, where does the Aleph appear in the word human being? At the very beginning. To almost teach us what the Tanya is teaching us here. And that is that Aleph needs to be in the driver's seat. Our divine soul needs to be able to guide the dam, the blood. It's not that the blood is not important, it's alive. It's a life force. But again, the Aleph, the divine soul, needs to be able to guide and channel that dam, that blood, that bodily self of ours to divine destinations. So what the Tanya is doing here is recognize that your animal soul is in the blood, both because of its emotions, the heart, and also because of its bodily desires. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of you being a human being. If you if you wouldn't be worldly or have any inclinations towards worldliness, then you would either be dead or you would probably be, I don't know, an angel. But the fact that you're a human being means that you have a lot of blood with all the connotations that it has. So there's nothing wrong with that. But remember, there's an Aleph, Adam. There's an Aleph, and the Aleph comes first. The Aleph needs to be the one in charge. That's really the deeper idea in Kabbalah of the word Adam. And that's why, even though there are many words or names for the word human being in Hebrew, Adam is always considered to be the highest level of the human being, the highest name, the name for the highest type of human being. There's a word Enosh, there's another word Ish, but Adam is really the highest, the name for the highest level of the human being. Why? Because Adam really symbolizes this idea that it's the Aleph that takes charge of the Dam. It doesn't crush it, it doesn't eliminate it, but it takes charge and drives it to divine places and destinations. So that's what Adam really means. And this is what Tanya is really saying here. Okay. All right, we can continue unless again there's more comments, questions, disagreements. No. All right, let's continue. Let's continue. We left off here 221.
Okay. The difference between the two souls is brought into focus by the question, where lies the center of life? What is the axis of the soul around which all else revolves? In the animal soul, the axis of existence is the self, which is identified with the body and the physical life of man. That self is the core of all existence and the end that it serves. Mm-hmm. The animal soul manifests itself in many forms, including some that are extremely refined and complex. But when these manifestations are traced to their source, it is consistently found to be the base instincts of man, the left ventricle in the heart that is full of blood, the person's identity as a physical being. For in the animal soul, the blood is the soul, Deuteronomy 12:23. Life is for the sake of life, rather than an instrument for a higher purpose. The blood is the soul, and the soul is the blood. The self is life, and life is the self. The self is the epicenter of being. All derives from it, and all reverts to it.
Right, almost like the heart that pumps blood, and then again, the blood comes back to its center and pumps it again, and comes back to its center and pumps it again. It's all about you. It's all about your self-existence. Mm-hmm. There's nothing beyond that. Now, it doesn't mean that again, it's wrong, but it does mean that it needs to be controlled by that Aleph that takes the human being, which can very, very well fall into the trap of me, myself, and I, and says to the human being what there's a higher purpose that you have to serve to. Life is not just about you. It's about what is needed of you. And And that's where the divine soul comes into play. But in a way, that's the deeper level. That's what Rabbi Stein is saying here, the deeper hint of the Tanya, that when we say that the animal soul dwells in the heart, we are saying that since the heart is the center of the self, so the animal soul dwells in the self. It dwells in the me, in the I, in the ego.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the animal soul is, really. It's not bad, but it just wants to be selfish. Is selfishness always bad? Not always. But that's not what life is all about. Even an animal soul feels that that's the center of life. That's the only reason of life. Or like Rabbi Stein put it so beautifully here, life is for the sake of life. That's it. There's nothing else. But life is not for the sake of life itself only. Life is for the sake of that which is greater than life. Divine purpose, God himself, what God wants of this world altogether. And it's not just about my life also in singular. It's about other lives in plural. And that's where the divine soul comes into play. But, now, as he said, the animal soul can be very, very refined. One can, by the way, be as religious as it gets and be as observant as it gets and as spiritual as it gets. But at the end of the day, if that person is only doing it for the me, then he hasn't come out of the realm of the animal soul. Some people, they pray because it feels good. So you're doing it for yourself. They give charity because it feels good. So you're doing it for yourself. They learn because it makes them wiser. So you're doing it for yourself. You could have all these complex and refined activities, but if the end goal is you, me, right, the ego, then you really haven't come out of the realm of the animal soul. By the way, I think this is very much connected to our month, the month of Elul, which is, as we explained yesterday at CBT, Elul means to search. And that's because we have to search deep within ourselves. What are we searching for? We're searching for the divine soul. That's what it's an inward search. And we're searching for the divine soul by asking ourselves, first and foremost, am I paying attention to what my divine soul wants? Not just my animal soul, not just my ego's soul. When my divine soul, because if we are paying attention to what our divine soul wants, we'll realize that it wants something that's greater than the me, greater than the satisfaction of the me. Something that's divine, something that's outside of the me, something that is truly eternal. And the more we can be in tune with our divine soul, I think the more we can really live a divine life. Now, again, we can be as religious as possible and as observant as possible. If it's only for the me, you've never been in touch with your divine soul. And this is the harsh way of the Tanya to put it. And I think to be as practical as possible, one way to deal with that question and to ask ourselves, if I find my divine soul, is to force ourselves. And I'm using the word force because when we force ourselves, very often it's to go against the ego. So we have to force ourselves to do something that is completely altruistic every day. Now, it could be a 5-minute thing. It doesn't have to be taking over your entire day. But at least let's do one activity that is completely altruistic, completely just for God every single day. I don't want to come out of my bed yet. I come out in order to pray. I did it just for God. That's altruistic. I don't want to speak with this person, but I'm speaking to this person anyhow and smiling at that person anyhow and cheering that person up anyhow, just for God. You did it not for yourself. You did it. That's when you become in tune with the divine soul. And I think that's, again, very much connected to this month. In a way, it's a good exercise to begin now, inspired by the Tanya, and to be best prepared for the high holidays.